going to post on Instagram, please do that. But make sure you include the hashtag Cultivation Classic or tag at Cultivation Classic. Today's closed captioning is provided by High Five Access and Typewell. There are reserved seats up here on the right of the stage for those looking to utilize this service.
Fantastic. So events like these could not be possible with the support of many, many generous sponsors. One of them is local True Terpenes, our 2019 main stage sponsor, and the reason we all get to enjoy the first ever custom beer made for the cannabis event, which is something I'm looking forward to.
It's an alcoholic beer with food-derived cannabis-flavored terpenes.
Exactly.
So it's alcohol that tastes like weed?
Blackberry Kush, I think, they used a True Terpenes chemical terpene profile and then added it in maybe with a dry hop. I don't know that. I'm making it up, but it's going to taste delicious. I'm looking forward to it. I guess they already tapped the keg yesterday, so some of you have probably already tried it. So let's go ahead and welcome Ben Cassidy, who's a good friend of mine from True Terpenes. He's going to say us a few words and get going. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank everybody for coming to the Cultivation Classic, kind of in the same vein as what we've just heard with the introduction here, you know, traveling all over the country and going to different events. You know, you see a lot of the same, and I'm so excited that one of my absolute favorite events happens within sight of my office. You know, the Cultivation Classic really is kind of the culmination of quality Oregon cannabis, and it has so many great ethos and logos involved in the production of the event, from the people and the level of inclusion and everything. I really love to be a part of this, and to be able to be one of the main sponsors this year is, you know, as you start a bootstrap small business and you grow over the years, you know, you just never know where you'll find yourself. So I encourage everybody, you know, I never would have thought we'd have the funds or the resources to be a part of putting this on, and today it's just an honor. So just want to thank everybody that let us, you know, take part and that came, and, you know, the event happens from both sides, the production staff and the people that are coming and taking part of it. From somebody that's been thinking about terpenes for, you know, 4 or 5 years in different levels, one of the things that excites me most about Cultivation Classic is the display of the data of the participant entries. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go around the back side, I think it would be this side of the cube outside and take a look at all the test results. I would people to try to look for patterns, and one of the ones that I noticed in looking at the applications, the participants as they were putting them up today, is that if you look at the, I can't think of the term that it was used, but basically the aroma intensity, if you look at all of the different participants, you'll find that if it's above a 4 out of 5 on the aroma intensity, there's only 3 entries that I saw that were not terpenoline dominant, that were above a 4 in aromatic intensity, which is kind of interesting to me. The ones that were, there was 1 beta-caryophyllene dominant, 1 myrcene dominant, and 1 limonene dominant. But other than that, almost everything else was terpenoline dominant for these pungent, kind of top note aromas. So something just to look into, kind of if you can take time to compare things that you've tried before, things that you'd like to try, and just start to look at, you know, what's different between the two. I get really excited when there's a public display of this sort of information that's digestible, and I think that's one of the main things that Cultivation Classic has done so well. So as a company, True Terpenes, you know, we really do all things terpenes. We derive them from the plant and do all sorts of fun things with them. We get them from food sources, from basically any essential oil bearing plant. We can extract and isolate terpenes and do formulations. And, you know, up until now in history, the majority of use of them has been in cannabis products. But the things that I'm actually most excited about are things like that beer, things where we can consume it in addition to the cannabis that we're consuming. As the quality and availability of cannabis becomes, you know, more widespread and available, it's the things that we can do with cannabis. You know, it's the topical lotions, the drinks, the consumable effervescent tablets you can use to control the experience that you're having, that I'm most excited about. So look out for terpene infused products, you know, from anywhere from your dispensary to new seasons over the next year, and I think you're going to find some really cool experiences that are going to become available to us. So thanks everybody for coming, and appreciate it.
Love those True terpenes, don't like those false terpenes. One more quick note, local vintage shop Urbanite provided this super sleek stage setup. Thank you to them. I did sit in this chair earlier when none of you were here. It was very comfortable. So let's get on with it. I want to welcome to the stage for a conversation about a plant riot, obviously the most dangerous of all kinds of riots. We have Karuna, Chourey, and Joshua Steensland with Moderator Shango Los.
Well, thank you again for you all for being here for our first, I guess we'll call this a panel today. I want to introduce two of my, I would say that you are both now friends more than just guests. To my right, we have Dr. Karuna Chourey, who is Director of Plant Microbe Interactions at Mammoth Microbes. And when I first heard her speak and then I heard her title, I was all like, I want to learn everything you know. And so have been interviewing her every chance I could. To her left is also a good friend, Joshua Steensland. He is a longtime cultivator and now international cultivating consultant all throughout Canada and the Caribbean now, but he's an Oregon boy, so many of you probably know him as a local. So how we're going to go about this is a few questions about polyculture, and for anybody who's not familiar with polyculture, it's very simply the idea of interplanting and companion planting with your cannabis plants. So we're used to doing monoculture and just having soil or hydro underneath our plants, but this idea is that we're going to plant other plants with them for the better benefit of them for everybody. So this first question, I'm going to start with Joshua, if you would answer first, and then Karuna, if you want to pick up after that. So our first question is, in what ways does polyculture companion planting benefit cannabis health that monoculture does not?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Shango. First off, I'm really, it's an honor to be here and share the stage with you. And so anyway, polyculture, what I've noticed in my gardens is just kind of it's hard to quantify health benefit. You really, we've noticed a lot less pest pressure. The soil health is more vibrant, and the plants really show that in the end. You get the finished product is just different. I've cultivated conventionally for 15, 16 years previous to switching to living soil, and I really think of it as polyculture. I was just companion planting and putting things in to help retain soil moisture and add nitrogen, and I just noticed that at the end my plants just looked incredible, and that was the biggest selling point to me, is the kind of the proofs in the pudding moment.
You said that you companion planted to help with moisture retention. Why don't you break that out a bit?
Sure. I mean, it typically in regular, garden situations where you have bare soil, you're clearly going to be losing a lot of moisture to the atmosphere and transpiration, and any way you can kind of lock in that moisture is a benefit. Sometimes people do it with mulch. That's a really common thing, straw or bark chips or whatever, but I really liked the idea of using live plants that interact with the rhizosphere and enrich the soil microbiology and retain moisture at the same time, which is just kind of a win-win.
Yeah, well, I've heard you describe it before as like creating a little rainforest below your plants. It's just, it's just creating this like smaller moisture cycle. So Karuna, it's the same thing to you since you're approaching this less as a cultivator and more as a diehard plant scientist. What do you see as the advantages from polyculture versus a monoculture?
So when you talk about polyculture, basically what you're doing is you're introducing many different kinds of plants along with cannabis. What we're introducing here is diversity. And as we all know, diversity is always good. With monoculture, you are basically providing the nutrition. You are providing moisture. You are providing pest control. You're doing everything on your own. But when you have a polyculture, you have all the different members in that farm or in that grow that take care of all these different aspects, and basically you're going to be hands-off. Plants that are grown in such diverse environment are more healthy because they kind of get all the nutrients on demand. They are all communicating with each other. I have we have spoken about this many times before, is beneath the ground, you have the roots and they are constantly communicating with each other. If there is just monoculture, they are only going to be talking one language. You are introducing many different kinds of plants. Now they're going to be talking different languages. They are all capable of doing different things. And that leads to a plant which is more healthy because it gets the right nutrition at the right time, correct moisture, and also these plants can fend off pests better than what a monoculture can. And so in all aspects, having a polyculture is the way to go. It's the best way to go.
It sounds like what you're describing is a situation where, you know, when you have a monoculture, you only get the know-how of the cannabis plant, but if you're adding all these other types of herbs, they all do their own jobs, and they're all providing different types of foods to the microbes in the rhizosphere. And so what you've got is a greater diversity of folks making short work of a complex array.
That's correct. And I have seen few grows where they have not introduced a different plant per se. They are still growing cannabis, but they have different cultivars in there. So some cultivars are susceptible to pests, some are not. Some are more efficient in nutrition utilization. And in those grows, I have seen that there might be some plants that might be infested with powdery mildew, but rest of the grow is completely free of powdery mildew. So here is your completely organic style farming, just because you decided to go a polyculture way rather than just grow one cultivar in a grow facility.
Fantastic. So Joshua, the two of you would be attracted to companion planting and choosing of the plants in different ways, right? Karuna might be coming at it from a scientific level because she knows the specific botany of other plants. You have, over your multiple decades of experience, have been choosing them more from your intuition, right? So I'm curious from both of you, how best can all of us, from folks who are home growing as patients in tents, or all the way up to folks who are watching who are scaling commercial, what's the best way to go about choosing the specific plants that we're going to install into our polyculture?
Sure. I think if you went kind of my route, which is just throw anything at the beds and see what happens, is what I've just kind of done, and have not been afraid to throw anything in my beds. And as I learn and as I observe, and we're learning things like mustard and potentially broccoli, like when those leaves break down, they could actually have a negative effect on the fungal components in the bed. So once again, it speaks to diversity. If you just had all of those as your companion plant, if mustard was it, man, you're really setting yourself up there. So I just kind of throw things at the beds, and whatever makes it, whatever doesn't. And that's the route I've taken, and so far so good. So, I think don't be afraid to just experiment. And like we've spoken on, diversity is the key. So if one thing out of the 12 or 13 or 20 things you have in your bed isn't working, it's not such a big deal. You don't have a nightmare on your hands.
So the one companion plant you mentioned was actually one that you don't recommend. Can you easily just recommend 3 for folks that if they just go and they plug into their soil is sure to be a win?
Yeah, absolutely. Comfrey is huge. It's a great dynamic accumulator. And when you leave it in the beds and allow the leaves to cycle the nutrients back in, it takes nutrients that were previously unavailable to the plant, rearranges them into a plant available form, and when those leaves get mulched back in, it's incredible for your growth. So definitely comfrey is huge. Any of the nitrogen fixers, we were talking a little bit about clover and thrip pressure and all these other things. So clover's all right. You don't want to do a whole lot of it, or just be prepared for thrips. But clover's great. Legumes are great. Nitrogen fixing things are really good. So I like comfrey, clover, nitrogen fixers, and ryegrass. The grasses are really nice. They do a really good job at creating a dense mat for that moisture retention. And then when they die off in cannabis, we get during your 2-month or 3-month flowering cycle, depending on what you got going, what's underneath the canopy will die off. And lots of times those are my decisions on what stays. As if it just didn't make it through the die off, I'm not too concerned about it. I'll replant something else.
I want to pinpoint one thing on there for anybody who's been following polyculture or may have heard Joshua on the Shaping Fire podcast. Folks are talking about now that that clover may not be the best because it attracts thrips. And that, of course, really disappointed me because that's what I used this year already. And so now I have to pull out all the clover. But I'm hearing a slightly different message from you today, which is clover is okay in very small moderation. So will you kind of clarify that for me? Because I thought we were not using clover at all anymore.
Well, I think I was just mainly speaking to the diversity part, that if you had, I think a little bit of clover is okay, because if you're planting other a diverse network of companion plants, we were just talking about this before coming on, that pest pressure that might be present from the clover can be mitigated by the attraction of beneficial insects from your other companion plants. So you really up your ante by having that diversity. So if you were all clover or 50% clover, you're gonna have a battle on your hands. Whereas if you have 5% clover, you're still gonna get nitrogen fixing. You're still gonna have diversity in the rhizosphere. And I think that pest pressure is gonna be less of an issue.
Right, I think that idea of don't put a monocrop under your monocrop is a good idea, right? So whatever you're gonna put under your monocrop so it's not a monocrop, make sure that it's diverse so you have polyculture. Nice. So Karuna, your approach is entirely different, right? You are thinking about what's going on in the rhizosphere and targeting specific plants because of your botany, and because you're involved with studies, it's a lot more expensive for your mistakes or your, if you find something that doesn't work. So how do you go about choosing plants that you would want to do a polyculture with?
So when you're trying to go with the polyculture, you have to first decide what is it that you need the polyculture for. Are you trying to plant things to get rid of pests, to attract beneficial insects, or you're just doing it for the nutrition cycling? Clover is an excellent example. It is very good at nitrogen cycling, so you want clover. At the same time, yes, it can repel thrips, but if you have high humidity, it can actually introduce powdery mildew in your grow. So be very careful. So you have to be aware of what is it that you want to have in your grow. For most of the grow that we have, it's indoors. So pest pressure is low to begin with. So I would basically look for anything that can be helpful in nutrient cycling. So many of the plants, like you have alfalfa, you have clover, you have many of them that can cycle not just nitrogen, they can cycle calcium, they can cycle sulfur. You want to have those kind of plants in your grow facility. So while you are providing your NPK fertilizer and other fertilizers, these plants are communicating with the cannabis plants and providing what they need in proper amounts. So that is for nutrition cycling. If you want to plant some marigolds, it's very nice. It will always get rid of all your other pests. So you have a really organic garden, pest-free garden. So what you want to plant depends on exactly what you want to do. So that's my way of looking at it. If you really have a lot of pests in your area, you go for something that can get rid of them. Go for alfalfa that can attract ladybugs, so you can take care of your spider mites. So it's just that mix and match the best way. Clover is good, but again, as a warning, if you are living in a place where there is high humidity, unfortunately clover can attract powdery mildew, so you may want to go for plants that are a little bigger and not trapping much of moisture. So look at your environment, look at what is native. That is another thing I should point out, is just because we say clover worked well or particular plant worked well in Portland, Oregon, does not mean it will work well in Fort Collins, Colorado, or it might work well in Florida. So you will have to look around what plant is present in your surroundings, go for the native ones because they know how to live, how to thrive in that environment. So just be aware of what you're looking for in your polyculture.
And that goes doubly so if you happen to be using native soils too, because as we know, microbes are bioregional, right? You're gonna have different microbes that are occurring in Colorado than we have here in Portland. And so, choosing companion plants that are local will probably interact with the microbes more successfully. So Karuna, you said that, marigold is a good example of something that will repel pests, yes, right? I'm a big fan of using beneficial insects, right? And so will the marigolds also repel my beneficial insects and have them leave the neighborhood?
So quite often when you have these plants that have got a lot of flowers, a lot of pollen, they will attract many of your predator bugs that can get rid of your pests. And one reason being is that you need to have plants which have got a lot of flowers. You have marigolds, you have gerbera daisies, because they can offer pollen. So when you have your predator mites or predator insects that can take care of a pest, what if you don't have pests? These guys still need to feed on something. And so their source of protein for them then becomes pollen. So having these kind of flowering plants in your grow is definitely beneficial because they can provide some sort of food source to your predator bugs, which are keeping your grow pest free.
One more follow-up on that before we move on. So you were saying that you choose the particular plants that you want for particular jobs, and then determine how much pest pressure you're going to have, and choose based on that. Are there also plants that are negatively allopathic instead of positively, like plants that we might choose as a companion plant, which actually doesn't play nice with cannabis?
There are many plants, especially the ones that kind of grow tall. You don't want them because then they are going to take away all the sunlight that your cannabis is supposed to relieve, is to get. So definitely look for plants that are shorter than your cannabis plants. Don't look for plants that require very high maintenance, like if you're going to plant roses, well, they look nice, but you are spending more time now supporting the rose than your cannabis. You don't want to do that. So look for plants that are low maintenance. They are shorter in growth compared to your cannabis, and that way you can assure that your plants are healthy, your cannabis is getting all the benefits. Keep the focus on cannabis, not the companion plants, but you need the companion plants. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And it's really easy to get distracted by your companion plants. Because I've had the cannabis plants in my gardens for years, but now that there's companion plants, not only is it more beautiful, but they're plants that I'm not as familiar with, right? And as we all know, growing cannabis is a gateway to horticulture, right? And so now that I'm growing my cannabis plants and having some amount of success, now I'm all interested in these other companion plants, which again, most everybody else is also calling weed, right? So it seems like all the plants I'm interested in are all weed, one way or another. So one of the challenges with polyculture and getting it adopted by people is people are like, it doesn't work for commercial, it doesn't work for scaling. We can't do it. It takes too much labor. You've got to get too much education. I've heard all of this stuff. But then I see Joshua's Instagram, right? And I'm seeing these beautiful commercial rooms that are companion planted, kicking out these fantastically yielding plants and flowers. So Joshua, tell us a little bit about that. Help me dispel the myth that polyculture is not for commercial scale.
Yeah, I think there's we're battling kind of an old way of thinking when it comes to just agriculture in general, and we're really fighting that kind of monoculture mentality. And so lots of people just don't really understand that it's just as simple as what I described earlier. It's as simple as just throwing stuff in there and seeing what works. And then at scale, you're not really adding much labor because you're just scattering seed or planting, a plant here or there, and your observation doesn't really change much. So at scale, it's not an issue we've found. And the benefit of the healthier beds and the healthier system in general is just worth that extra effort, and maybe worth some of the anxiety you might have with investors, or if you're working for an owner, they might not understand those things. And the really other common questions are like, aren't they taking nutrients, and aren't they robbing nutrients from the soil? And so a lot of these things, people just need to be reassured that there's a process in place, and it doesn't really require a lot of interaction on our part.
It's funny that you would mention the investors or the owners, because that's exactly where I was going to go next. We probably have a lot of cultivators in the room, folks who are just patients like me who just have a few plants. But I know that there are commercial cultivators in the room that are responsible for a lot of lights, right? So as a commercial cultivator who has had to turn on your investors to this, right? What do you recommend as being the best argument to take to the owners on why they should do this radical thing?
Yeah, I think fortunately I have a body of work to reference from my home grows, and so I've got several years. I've got beds that are 4 years old, so I have a little bit of a reference point that I can bring them product from my grow and just really talk with them and get them comfortable with the idea that there's a natural process at work here, and that we really don't, maybe not need to necessarily fully understand it to implement it. And that's kind of a scary statement to say to people who have hundreds of thousands of dollars into a project. But just I have such confidence in that natural order that it's a really easy sell.
Now, Karuna, I know that for you, it is all about analytics and spreadsheets, right? And so you look with very close awareness on what is actually happening in the plant. So from your perspective, how do you, explain to people how polyculture is increasing yields, and if there is more labor, it's well worth it?
That's a very good question, and that is something that comes to the top of everybody's mind who wants to go to polyculture. They're like, are you not adding more plants, which means that you need more water for irrigation, you need more, fertilizers added. So I will go back and say first thing you choose a plant that is not going to be as demanding. So go local. What can thrive in your local environment is something you go choosing for. As I said, don't go plant roses. They are really demanding. You don't want them there. So go for something that again classifies as weed. What do we talk about? We talk about dill, we talk about marigold, we talk about gerbera, daisies, we talk about lavender. Can you kill a lavender plant? No, I don't think so. They just thrive. They thrive. So you want a plant which is not going to be demanding on nutrition or your fertigation. What do you get in return from all that? Just look at that. Now these plants are going to be there. They are going to be cycling nutrients as per what your cannabis plants require. So you in long term are going to have really healthy plants which have gotten the right amount of nutrients at the right time. That's the first thing. Secondly, by introducing all these different plants, you're going to get rid of all the pests that you're thinking of, right? So no more spider mites, no more any other mites that are coming and troubling your cannabis plants. You don't have to use pesticides. We all are aware of the biggest problem that pesticides pose. I don't have to introduce the audience to that kind of problem. We all know, we are aware of it. So if you don't have any pesticide use in your grow, what you have is an organic bud, an organic yield completely. You are not going to be worrying about this pest management or use of pesticide anymore. And the plants in general are going to be so healthy. I have seen it with my eyes that you are finally going to have a very good yield, which is completely organic, pesticide free, and it does not require as much nutrition and irrigation as people think. If you think you are going to require that much, you're doing something wrong. Go back and take a look at, can you change your companion plant and come back to a plant which is not as demanding.
I've experienced that myself. So I've just recently learned about polyculture from Joshua, actually, when we did our podcast episode on it. And so I decided, all right, let's do this. And so of course it gives you an excuse to buy more seeds, right? And who doesn't love a seed catalog, right? And so that was cool. And then of course I oversowed, so my companion plants were like, whoa, luckily the cannabis is taller, so I'm in good shape there. But one thing that I noticed is being a novice grower, as I still consider myself, I have a tendency for my soil to go hydrophobic, right? I think most of us have had that experience where you're gonna hand water and the water runs off the side of the pot and down the end and out the hole, and you're like, come on, And so when you companion plant, there's all these new entry points into the soil. So now when I water, it's not sliding down the side and going down the side of the pot. It's actually staying there, being held by the other plants, and then soaking in. And for me, that was the quickest discovery I had, and my soil is so clearly healthier.
Absolutely.
So now you both hit on something that I hear all the time. People say, all right, If I've got all these companion plants, though, they're stealing nutrition from the cannabis plant. And you know, there's two different ways to address that. There's the actual soil amendments that can be expensive, that perhaps these plants are using. And then also, is it literally taking from the plant? So Karuna, let's start with you. Will you address the nutrition, whether or not you actually have to increase it, and by how much?
So whether do you have to increase nutrition? I'll go to that question first right away. No, I don't think so. And let me explain what goes on. So far we have been discussing what goes on the top when you're growing. So what is visual? What we are completely forgetting is there is a whole ecosystem down there in the soil. And each plant is quite capable of attracting its own set of microbes that it likes to play with. And these plant and microbes, they communicate with each other. The microbes are very good at fending off root pathogens. They're very good at solubilizing nutrients. They're very good at providing enzymes and other metabolites that boost plant growth. And they don't steal from each other. Let me tell you that. If anything, they provide each other with healthy nutrients. So you have cannabis, which can attract its own set of soil microbes in its rhizosphere, and it's doing its job. But the next plant next to it has its own set of microbes that can provide a completely new set of metabolites that is now available to your cannabis plant. So at the end of the day, your cannabis plant is going to benefit from having any sort of diversity in the soil. These plants don't steal from each other, they actually enrich each other. So that's a very good case for having diversity in your group rather than just having a monoculture.
The way you describe it, I want to move in myself, right? That sounds like a community I want to be a part of. So Joshua, same kind of question to you, right? Because the science sounds believable, but in the end, it's all about, you know, when the rubber hits the road, does this actually work? And you work every day in this kind of environment. So what are your experiences with nutrition and water and the potential from the companion plants to starve out the cannabis plant?
Sure. She pretty much nailed it clearly, and it's basically what I would add is that a properly amended soil or properly amended garden is going to have plenty of available nutrient for everything there. And so I don't think of, say, my beets as taking nutrients from my cannabis. I think of the beets as taking nutrients from the nutrient pool. And then if I'm not taking those things out of the garden and leaving them and letting them cycle, then those nutrients are kind of staying there. There's no subtraction happening really when you take time into account. So diversity of course is key, and I think that just leaving the things in there to cycle those nutrients back, you're not going to experience a loss.
One thing that I didn't understand at first when I first planted my polyculture is that, being brought up NPK and just dump it on the plant and hope for the best, right? Once you realize that there are huge advantages to using a living soil, and that we then choose to feed the soil instead of the plant, I think it's pretty surprising to realize that the microbes that are there that we're trying to support are actually making plant food. I found that I'm actually having to add less amendments and top dress after the fact, because it's once I've revved up this engine, it's actually becoming self-replicating because the microbes are doing their jobs once you kind of get the pump primed. So Karuna, and I would like you to go into the science part. So go over my head at least, and speak to the people who are more familiar with this. What is going on at the microbial level that is causing these microbes to excrete these foods that other microbes use? Like, give us a snapshot of how that works.
So as the plant grows, in a single 24-hour cycle, the plant exudates are given up through its roots, right? So the plant, when it's doing its photosynthesis, it's making food, but at night time, it is going to let those exudate out from the roots. Now, those exudates, we might think, okay, it's an exudate, but that exudate is actually food for the microbes. It's basically saying, here is the food, and that food is so specific for a few microbes that they get attracted. And when they come to eat that food from the plant, in exchange, they are going to give the plant something which is going to be a metabolite, which is going to boost the growth in a plant. This is very cyclic. So you have different group of microbes doing different things throughout the day. So this is one set of microbes. Now you have second set of microbes doing the same thing with other plants. After you're done with harvest, you're saying, okay, now the plants are already gone. What do these microbes do? They don't perish. They are still there. What they are going to do is they're going to take the rest of the roots that are left there. They're going to decompose it. So they're going to take all the nutrients, they're going to break it down, and they don't get washed away. They're going to be there. So next time when you're going to start with your grow again, these nutrients are already available. And like you said, over the period of time, you have to use less and less and less of added fertilizer to get much better plant. You add less fertilizer, but you get much more healthier plants. So having microbial diversity in the soil is the key to having healthy growth. And the more different plants you have, the more different microbes you have in the soil, and that will keep your grow very healthy.
Fantastic. And also, that is a great time to plug no-till. Because as we've all realized, after you put all this effort into infusing all of this life into soil, and you're using less of your bottled nutrients, hopefully less and less of them all the time, eventually you end up with this beautiful living soil, and it smells good, and there's worms, and occasionally you'll get mushrooms, and that's all great. But then we were all brought up to get rid of your soil, sterilize the pots, and start with brand new soil. So Joshua, you are a big proponent of no-till, and you've got these great indoor beds that you just plant on again more and more. Would you break out what your growing cycle looks like when you are using no-till?
Yeah, it is incredibly simple. It's so simple that I feel guilty accepting praise at the end. It's really so simple. If you have your beds nurtured in such a way, you should be able to just plant your plants in, adjust the light cycle, and let it go. And we talked about this too, about just getting out of the way. Like there's so much happening that is independent of our involvement once we insert the plant into a healthy living soil. That meddling, it just brings variables, and variables, I try to avoid them like the plague. And so, I think living soil really enabled me to look at my cultivation practices and eliminate just a myriad of these variables that I was dealing with in the 15 or 16 years previous. So, I think no-till is one of those kind of buzzwords in the community right now, and for the most part, people understand it, but people really are having trouble wrapping their head around the fact that you really don't have to do anything, that you got to kind of separate your ego and your kind of mad scientist self and just separate yourself from it and let that process play itself out and just observe. And that's what really has turned me on about no-till and why I've kind of become evangelical about it, is it changed me in so many ways and my cultivation style. And the quality of medicine and the quality of products that we see, even just the quality of my produce at home when I switched, my vegetable garden to a no-till type regenerative system. It's hands down better.
I think you nailed it too when you said that, it's one thing to understand the definition of no-till, but another thing to believe it, right? Because it definitely sounds too good to be true, right? Because the labor savings is incredible. You're saving all this money on soil, and every time you do a new cycle, your soil's already primed and ready to rock, right? So let's talk real brass tacks here for a second. So you've got this no-till bed, and you've just harvested your cannabis plants, and you've got some amount of companion plants that are still going. What are you going to do next? Specifically, I want you to talk about root balls and stuff.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so you spoke earlier about as the beds mature, you need to add less and less dry nutrient and mineral content, and that's really true. Now, my beds at home are about 4 years old. I only re-amend them twice a year. Every other cycle. So if it's a re-amend period, I never re-amend with my cash crop, the cannabis, in the beds. I just I've been wanting to illustrate that cannabis can be grown with water only, with no other inputs, and you can get the whole cycle. You're not sacrificing yields, you're getting a better quality. So I don't do any kind of top dressing or re-amending during that cycle, and if it's an off cycle, I won't even re-amend. I'll just harvest the plants, cut the stalk at the root, at the soil level, and just leave it. And as she described earlier, it just gets consumed by the soil biology. It cycles the nutrients that are locked up in the roots, and I just plant the new crop right next to the old one. And then after about 3 cycles, sometimes 2, it's just completely gone. There's nothing left.
It's so strange to see an old cut plant in the bed. It looks like, as somebody who I like to keep really clean gardens, it looks like you know, heresy right there. You know, that should be gone. And it takes a while to realize that, you know, like, nature's not clean. And you know, when we see tree trunks and decaying plant matter, that's part of this whole cycle. Whereas I have traditionally wanted to, like, clean it all up, but I think it's well to your point where we a lot of polyculture, well, heck, gardening at all is just getting our egos out of the way. Yeah. So this idea of, you know, adding companion plants is fun, right? And so I'm curious to hear from both of you. You know, how will the companion plants do in this environment as well? Because really, the companion plants are there to serve the rhizosphere and the cannabis plant, but it'd be really cool if they would, you know, bloom or maybe even produce food. How are they going to, you know, work on an 18-6, you know, or so light cycle during veg that then gets shifted to 12-12? We know our favorite plant likes that, but I'm sure that some of the companion plants are like, whoa, you know? So how should we think about that? Why don't you start, Karuna?
So this is kind of very funny, and I hear this question so many times about what will the companion plants do 12-12 cycle. So cannabis has been growing outside the grow for as many years as we all know. And if you look at any outdoor grow, it doesn't happen that the plant decides, okay, 12 hours, let's switch the light off, we got to bloom. That doesn't happen. So your companion plants are definitely going to adapt. If it is an outdoor grow cycle, they will be perfectly fine because it does not happen that the light is going to be switched off, right? Like what we do for indoor grows. In the indoor grow, again, your focus is on cannabis, not the companion plant. So when you switch the light, they might take a little bit longer to bloom, maybe, and that's perfectly fine because your focus is the cannabis, not your companion plant. Unless you want your, you know, Gerbera daisy to bloom and you don't care about your cannabis, that's a different story. Then we cater to that population. But at any point, you focus on your cannabis plant and the rest of your companion plants will definitely adapt and it will not be a big issue at all.
Fantastic. Now, Joshua, I know that you've gone so far as to intermingle food plants, which I think that's great, to be able to get both smoke and food out of the same bed. Like we're talking about efficiencies here. So why don't you talk a little bit about that process and how you chose the foods and maybe make some suggestions people might want to try if they want to get stuff out too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think when I decided to introduce food into the polyculture, it was mainly to diversify what the soil microbiology and the worms had access to. I try not to take much out of my beds for that reason. I just like those nutrients to cycle back. And so my experience has been to really not consume much of anything and just leave it to the beds. I'm growing it for the soil microbiology and talking on the light cycle thing, I've had one particular broccoli plant that's been in my beds for 2 years and has never flowered. It's just constantly in this vegetative state, and I'm thinking that has something to do with the light cycle and maybe some of the diffused light. But back to your question, as I typically don't grow food for my consumption in the beds. It's basically just to kind of have a diverse array of things to go back into the soil.
And certainly, companion planting food is a whole lot easier if you're working outdoors too, right? Nicholas Mahmood down at Green Source in Wolf Creek, Oregon, he's by far the person I've seen that's done the best. I mean, under his companion plants, you've got beds of straw, and then under those he's got potatoes, and he's got artichokes coming up, and it's amazing because as he goes through and gives you a tour of the farm, he's also pulling out lunch, right? And I think it makes for a really unique experience, both reminding us that the cannabis plant is a naturally occurring plant. It does not have to be separate from nature. It is of nature, and also. Especially when margins are so tight here in Oregon, if you can also get lunch out of it, that's a win as well, right?
Yeah, I gotta say, I have the deepest respect for Green Source Gardens. They are literally the tip of the spear and a shining example of regenerative agriculture. And I think we all need to look to them as that example and try to emulate it as much as possible.
And I think it's important too. I always say Green Source and Nicholas because he's the guy that I interviewed, but his wife Elizabeth deserves just as much credit. It's their partnership together, bouncing things off each other, both of them educating and then bringing information back to each other and to Jesse, who's also on the farm. It's a real team effort, just like polyculture, right? So, Karuna, let's finish up with you on a similar question. From the science side, if somebody did want to companion plant food, what should they look for in a plant that's going to thrive food-wise alongside cannabis?
Again, as I said, when you're going for your companion plant, focus should be cannabis, not food plant. So plant something that is going to be small and not going to be really tall. You don't want to be planting big style tomatoes, that require more care. So plant something that will be shorter than cannabis plant, will not take so much of nutrition. You don't have to keep fertilizing your companion plant rather than cannabis. So those kind of, any plant that fits that criteria and is quite local, can thrive in your local environment, go for that kind of food plant.
So we're thinking lettuces, radishes, what else?
You have lettuce, radish, alfalfa, of course, you don't eat alfalfa, but then that is a good one to have there. You have dill, you have basil, many of these herbs, they're very good. They look nice, they are very good pest repellents, and they also help with their shallow root system. They can hold on to soil, so you have less of erosion, less of materials kind of just washing out. What other plants can I think of? Mint is a very good one. I completely agree. Mint will also repel so many other pests that are present in your garden. So there are so many herbs. Herbs is something that you can never go wrong with. So that is the first thing that you go for. I know he does a lot of beets. I just heard from him and I was impressed about it. Beets, you can go for beets apparently. Anything that is below the ground or just a little bit above the ground, not competing for sun space with cannabis is preferred.
I love the idea that you went towards culinary herbs, right? Because I'm thinking, herbal plants and weeds, not something that I'm going to go and snip and go throw on some scallions and avocado with soy sauce, right? The idea of having an actual culinary herb garden below my plants sounds easy and delicious at the same time. So we're all for that. So it looks like that we are out of time. Please put your hands together for Dr. Karuna Chourey. So I'm really happy about this next module that we're doing. This next module is something that I've been plotting for 2 or 3 years now. Today we're going to do the first live Shaping Fire podcast recording. And it's kind of funny because the original idea of it came because I am not very heavy into recording technology. And so you may have noticed that on my show, I generally just interview one person at a time, and that's because of my abilities with technology. And so I thought, okay, well, if I really wanted to do something where I could interview multiple people at the same time, it would be really great to do it in a live environment so that both of my guests could be on the same audio channel. And then also, there's something about doing something live in front of a, big stage audience, that really adds something to the conversation. So that's where we are here today. We're going to record this and then it will run on the Shaping Fire podcast, the audio version. So the topic though today is very close to my heart. We're going to be talking about autoflowers today. And it's funny because a lot of people really discount autoflowers. They think that they're low yielding and they're not good for the breeding scene. And I got to tell you that autoflowers are great for a very particular kind of grower. They're fantastic for patients. They're fantastic for people with mobility issues. They're wonderful for folks who live where we live, where we start to get the rains there the last week of September, the first week of October, and our 8-week blooming flowers are just getting finished, and then the mold rolls in. Whereas with an autoflower, you can pop a seed on June 1 and harvest on September 1, and you're well ahead of the weather. You might need to, you might need to plant twice as many, but the idea that you can get done without your plants molding is a huge win. So I reached out to two of my friends who are also at the top of the field of autoflowers, and they are going to join me now. Please welcome Jeff Lowenfels and Seth Crawford. So for those of you who don't know, I'll start with Jeff on the far side. Jeff Lowenfels is a 45 plus year gardening author out of Alaska. But most of us in this room know him from his Teaming with Microbes, Teaming with Fungi, and Teaming with Nutrients series of books, which is like essentially the Holy Grail trilogy for people who love this kind of stuff, right? And so he has also got a new book coming out in October, all about autoflowers. And it's fantastic. I've been able to check out parts of it as it went to the publisher, and it's very much an introduction to autoflowers. And because of that, I see Jeff as an evangelist for autoflowers. And then to his right is my other good friend, Seth Crawford, and some of you may know him as a co-founder with his brother Eric of Oregon CBD Seeds near Albany. And so they're focused on heavy-duty, non-GMO, heavy analytical breeding there at their laboratory, and with the goal of developing particular chemovars that can target particular symptom issues for patients. And so they started with CBD, they have figured out the CBG, they're on their way to the varins, and it's fantastic. Much to the joy and chagrin of cannabis farmers throughout the country, their seeds continually get outstripped because as many as they produce, everyone just then goes and buys those, and then they're out again. And so, if people vote with their wallets, people are voting for Oregon CBD. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. So I'm going to have a sip of water here, and then off we go. All right, so most people may understand that autos finish faster, but that doesn't mean the best application for autos are readily apparent to everyone. So I would like to hear you both, starting with you, Jeff. How will autos influence cannabis growing and horticulture going forward?
Well, let me give two different answers. The book, as you indicated, is really an introductory book. I like to say it's a book for your sister and your brother. It's a book for your Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally. It's not a book for a professional grower. I'm convinced that autoflower cannabis is going to change the general population's attitude about cannabis because it's the next tomato plant. Once in a lifetime, I'm 70 years old, it's only happened to me once in a lifetime, a new plant is introduced to the general horticultural gardening public. The last time it happened, it was the snap pea. They took over the pea world, and every gardener grows snap peas a couple of times during their career and probably every year. That's what's going to happen, I think, to these autoflowers because they're so easy to grow. Their quality has risen so high as a result of the genetics. And so that's the first answer. The second answer is this is a plant which you can grow on a deck, which you can grow outside in a garden, you can grow it in a perennial bed, you can grow it in a pot in the ground. And so it's something that is accessible to all growers, not just people who have big farms or a big greenhouse. And because they don't have a photo period, it means that people who live in northern climates like Alaska, where on September 21st your plant finally gets the darkness that it needs to set flower, you also get a frost that night. And then finally, for those who do professionally grow. Here's a plant which you can use to interspace between your plants as they veg, the same thing, your plants as they flower. You just put them in, they don't care what the light is. You can give them 20, 24 hours of light, they're gonna flower based on their genetics, and so you can use your spare space. This is a dream for the entire horticultural world.
Fantastic. So Seth, I know you're coming from a little different direction. Jeff and I share that we're both very interested in home growers and patient growers, but your customers and the people you were talking, I mean, I know you're a heavy patient guy, so I'm not saying you're not into patients, but your customers are very demanding, right? And so what are you seeing as far as the advantages for autoflowers for folks that are growing at a scaled level, at acreage size?
And I would say, since this is going to be on the internet for ever, this is for posterity.
Yeah, this will be forever.
Go back and take a look if you're very interested about geeking out on some of the historical background on ruderalis. That's the technical term for autoflowering plants. Ruderalis is Latin for derived from ruderol, which is rubble, from the rubble. These are plants that can grow anywhere. Like, they can grow where it freezes. They can grow through frost. They can grow in very, very crazy situations and actually finish. The trick at industrial scale is really being able to get them in the ground at the right time. So whether that's a direct seeding or transplanting before the plant goes through stress, there's some underlying genetic mechanisms that lead the plant to go directly into flower when it senses a stressful situation. Just to step back for a second, because of that posterity's sake, take a look for that geek out moment at Ernie Smalls. Ernie Smalls is a Canadian researcher who's been working on cannabis related issues for the last 45 years. Brilliant gentleman. And he's the person that was responsible for coming up for the industrial hemp 0.3 THC rule. And if you go back and look at his earlier writings, it was based on taking a leaf off of the top of the plant rather than testing the top 8 inches of flower at 0.3%. Hopefully that's going to be incorporated into the USDA rules as they move forward with the Farm Bill. But in 2018, he wrote a seminal paper, and I'm sure that this is going to go down as one of those testaments to autoflowering plants in the long term. The paper is about highlighting the fact that these day-neutral autoflowering plants represent really the peak in human agriculture. So in a lot of other crops, the reasons and rationales that we have for expanding the total productivity of each individual crop on a per acre basis has come down to plant breeders, geneticists, et cetera, over long periods of time, being able to make the plants more compact, make them more uniform, and take wild types of plants that tend to have seeds in varying places on the plant and consolidate them into a usable, machine harvestable, really energy dense organism. And that's been true for many of the other crops that have been domesticated. Ernie Smalls goes so far as to say that that is the most profound thing that we've seen in over 13,000 years of human agriculture, is this move towards, he calls them semi-dwarf or dwarf germplasm. So the title of the paper is Dwarf Germplasm, and essentially it's about how to get tremendously large yields, both for food crops, if you're growing for seed, hopefully in places where they're not growing for sensimilla or cannabinoid products. We can get into that later. But also for cannabinoid production in general. So it's all about being able to maximize the space, minimize the inputs, and really allow both farmers and people who benefit from these compounds to have more access to them and to benefit from this plant. And autoflowering plants are tremendous at this.
Yeah, maybe we ought to explain. So these plants, if you're not familiar with autoflowers, two things. First of all, they'll start to flower in 18 days up to 3 weeks. They'll just flower, period. Which is pretty incredible. And then the other thing about them is that you can overdo it with them. This is a plant that grew quickly. They were discovered in about 1900, 1903. Scientists found them in the Volga River area in Russia. He described it. It had low THC or no THC, and so they basically forgot about them. And then in the 70s, people started to say, maybe we could breed these. And so, the breeding happened, and then in 2003, a guy was able to successfully commercialize one called Lowrider. These are the ultimate heirloom kind of thing. They're not a land race really, I don't think anymore, but they're heirloom, and you can breed these things. They go flower in the 18-day, third week. By 9 weeks, they're finished. You harvest it. Wow, the breeding potential and opportunities on these things are just spectacular. So the opportunity to be able to improve on this plant, like we have, in theory, improved on some of our agricultural plants, is absolutely incredible.
Another thing that I love about them is that if you have got a greenhouse environment, but you really want to supplement with light for whatever reason, you can actually do 2 cycles of autoflowers without light depth. And that's crazy, right? I'm experimenting with that this year, and the biggest thing I ran into was trying to keep them warm, because autoflowers don't particularly like to start off their life with cold feet. But the idea is, you can have your you can start something early spring and have it finish 4th of July, and then put seeds in that same no-till environment, let those pop, and they're done by October 1st. So you've run 2 cycles, and you don't have to pull any tarp, which we all want to avoid, right? And so that's fantastic. And the other thing I wanted to hit on was how appropriate these are for patients and for people with lower mobility, because, like Jeff mentioned, these are very compact plants, right? These pretty much top out at around 3.5 feet. And because of that, you don't have to do the reaching, and they're not hard to break down, and the patient can stand up and look all around them for mold, instead of trying to work with some of these 9-footers where they're just impossible to work with. They're beautiful, and I love them, and I want to toke them, right? But they're all caged and difficult to work with. So this is something that folks who are living in an apartment, who are growing in a tent, can grow 4 of these together with no sweat. You don't even need to scrub them. And then if you're a patient, they're so easy to use and always going to flower in a particular time frame and be ready to go, that it really opens up the door.
But let's not leave the impression that these are little teeny baby flowers because they're little teeny plants. There are some, I've seen colas that are 80 grams. Wow. Unbelievable. And they'll have 10 of these colas on a plant. So these are not the low rider that you remember. These are a totally new plant, ready for prime time.
Just to add on to that, so yes, you can make them flower in general for field production. We're looking at about 77 days from the time that the seed emerges in a starter plug, transplanted into the field within the week. 77 days from that time of emergence until we harvest it. And what Jeff is saying is absolutely true. What we see with regular photoperiod plants is the stem and stalk weight accounts for about 27.5% of the total biomass of the plants. With these day neutral plants, you're looking at roughly 19%. So this is an order of, talking about a significant percentage of increased biomass. Now, the one thing that I will say, and it's a little bit of a brain bubble, is try growing one of these in a 100-gallon smart pot. Okay, so it's really nice for patients or someone who's just trying to experiment with one of these plants in a 3-gallon container to have it on their deck. It's amazing. It's really cool. They're very useful plants. They stay small. They're not going to flip out if you hit them with a porch light in the middle of the night when you go outside. But if you put one in a much bigger container, you're going to notice that the flowering system is genetically determined based on stress, and stress particularly to the root zone. So you can actually grow 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 foot tall autoflowering plants if they have enough root space and they're not restricted. They're actually, when we think about cannabis, one of the things that researchers always go back to is the amazing plasticity of that plant, its ability to respond to the environment that it's placed in. Autoflowering plants, these day neutrals, are, to me, it's the epitome of that.
All right, so I want to pull together something Jeff just said and something you just said and take it further. So Jeff loves to talk about how these scrappy little plants from Russia, you can put them in rocky, crappy soil and they still very much thrive. And you have spoken to me before, just like you just did to all of us, it's the stress of the roots hitting the bottom of the pot that's going to trigger flowering. But I've never heard you give this example before of these large 100-gallon pots, which makes me very interested in growing an 8-foot autoflower just to do it, right? So here's my question: is that how do they grow in soil then? Because like I know you go right into the ground, but there's no eventual bottom of the pot. So there has got to be something going on scientifically.
Genetic. It is genetic.
Yeah, so what's the trigger?
Yeah, in part. And one of the things, there are many, many different soil conditions. In the Willamette Valley, we're blessed with a number of things, including, we'll get into this as we talk about farming at scale, but we have in certain locations 38 feet of topsoil. And if it's properly prepared, you can end up with very large plants. I mean, we had plants that were averaging 1.5 pounds per plant, planted very densely in the field just north of Corvallis last summer for one of our R&D trials. It really comes down to proper soil preparation and the ability for those roots to just go out and do their thing.
You know, and in the book, I stress that from the perspective of an amateur growing these things, they don't really like to be repotted all the time. I mean, so I always tell people to grow them in the original container. I started out with three-gallon containers because, you know, I thought the plants were cute and everything else. And there's something they call it now, super autoflowers. They're really the same thing, but different soil structure and different soil amounts. And so now I'm telling people 5 gallons is good, that, you know, ubiquitous hardware bucket, but 7 gallons is even better. And you put the seed right in it. I mean, I don't even start them in because I think if they are stressed, they will flower. And the worst thing you can have is something that flowers when it's just, you know, thinking, oh no, what did I do? Because they're not cheap seeds. Although you can grow your own seeds and they become cheap.
Yeah, it's disappointing when they're 5 inches tall.
Yeah.
And I actually did that for my first time, and I can admit to making that mistake. My first tray last year, I still like my idea. I put them in root riot plugs, which I like, because when I propagate right into soil, it's a lot more difficult to keep the soil or keep the seed in a moist environment, right? The top of the soil dries out really fast, whereas those root riots, while they are soil, and so I'll put the seed in there and let it pop. And as soon as I've got firmly established cotyledon leaves, then I go ahead and I put it in before the roots are coming out the bottom.
But they do make some cute little plants. I mean, I saw a little plant growing in a thimble with a you know, it had a beautiful little head on it about that big. It was such a sexy little thing, you know. It was just, you know, kind of thing you put on Instagram and go, hey, look at this. And
and so I had a tray of these, right? I had a tray of these, and I let them sit too long in the tray before because you're right. You said, you know, that same week, you know. But so I let them sit to there, and so I had a tray of very expensive, beautiful 8-inch autoflowers, and each one had this gorgeous big nug on top. And you know, the yield per weight was incredible. The yield per $15 seed was not, right? So I'm growing my own and still paying $15 a gram, which is like not a win. But they made awesome gifts to people, because you give somebody a small plant with this fully mature bud, and you're like, here you go, snip it off, like let it dry for a couple days and smoke it, and they're like, really?
well, and actually, you know, I know we're getting out of order here, but keeping in my idea that this is the next tomato, I'm convinced that in the next future few years, you're going to be able to walk into, you know, Whole Foods or wherever at Christmas time, and they're going to have a little shelf, and it's going to have, you know, 30 little autoflower plants sitting there that look like a little Christmas trees. You know, and then at Easter time, you know, you're going to have plants with that little green plastic crap, you know. These plants are unbelievable. They are so much fun to grow. I just cannot. I'm peeing in my pants. I love this stuff.
So I want to bring the conversation back to medical, which obviously I keep bringing this conversation back to because those are the people I work with a lot. And so and we're going to keep going with you, Jeff, and then we'll jump back to Seth. So in terms of medical, Jeff, I'd like you to speak a bit to the ease of growing, and I've heard you talk about how you can actually do too much, right? So I would like to hear that, and then Seth, would you pick up, since you are analytically breeding these to help with particular ailments, I'd like to hear from you how the breeding of autoflowers can be so targeted because they're so quick to cycle. So, but Jeff, let's start with you.
Well, these are unbelievable plants, and the only thing I can compare it to is a marigold. I read a garden column in the newspaper up in Anchorage, and marigolds are the one plant I say, you gotta plant something or you're not a real gardener. So you plant a marigold, you can have your kid do it with you because it's the only seed. You stick the seed in the ground, it's like a sunflower seed. There's certain seeds, you just put them in the ground, you walk away. You don't do anything and they grow well, they grow the way they're supposed to grow. And that's what happens with these plants. If you put too much fertilizer in the soil, if you put any don't put any fertilizer the first time you grow it because you may not need it ever. You got to watch these plants very carefully. They grow so quickly that that when the white fly or whatever decides to hit it, all of a sudden it's gone through the stage where the right kind of juice is there. Wait a minute, what happened to my plant? It's not the same plant anymore, and the insect moves on. I mean, these things don't need a lot of care. Now you got to keep an eye out for mildew and the kinds of things that you normally do, but they grow so quickly. That if you push them too much, they're not going to grow well. The only thing I do to mine to start, when I buy a seed from somebody I don't know whether it's going to be any good, I put the mycorrhizal fungi on it, and that is all I do. And generally, I've never had to fertilize any of my plants.
And they grow so fast. For those of you who grow indoors, especially in tins, you don't really have enough time to screw them up.
Right.
And that's fantastic, right? I had never heard your example, Jeff, about the plant growing through the stage of life that appealed to any particular pest. But that makes sense. The first round I did, I got no mold issues, no pest issues, and where I live on Vashon Island, we don't have that much pest, but we always get mold, right? And it's just that their life cycle is so short, a lot of that stuff doesn't have a time to take over.
And they've been bred to get rid of the mold. So I know the people that grow with new breed seeds, that's what they were looking for, mold. Let's get rid of that mold, and they did it. So,
In terms of being able to use these plants for different medical conditions, I always defer to Dr. Ethan Russo, who is somewhere out here. So I'm not going to speak to exactly what type of compounds are going to help for particular ailments. All we know is that all of these different compounds are very useful, and trying to figure out exactly how to triangulate and make use of those compounds and get them into plants in a way that's useful for patients and for people across the world is really our goal. So when we look at different plants from a breeding perspective, what we're really trying to do is we need photoperiod plants for very particular locations. We need plants that are going to flower early but are still photoperiod sensitive. And we need autoflowering plants so that you can deploy these plants in, basically, once you've developed a particular chemovar, you can deploy them anywhere in the world. And that's really what makes these different compounds available to people. So having CBD varieties, having CBG varieties, CBC-rich plants, more importantly now working on CBDV, CBGV, and CBCV, along with other minor compounds that we don't even know how to quantify and don't have reference standards for. All of those are incredibly important, and not just from a patient perspective, being able to grow it at home and take care of your own family or take care of yourself through the joy of actually gardening a plant. There's something emancipatory about being able to do that. I think everybody feels that. But being able to make sure that those compounds are available at scale at a price that individuals can actually afford to treat themselves, it's pretty important. And these plants make that possible. One good example of that is being able to use the plasticity of autoflowering plants for a particular ecological niche. So most people here are probably familiar with how much grass seed the Willamette Valley produces. The Willamette Valley is home to 95% of the world's grass seed production. We're able to grow grass seed in the Willamette Valley, for better or for worse, due to the climate that we have. So we don't normally get rain in the Willamette Valley through the middle of July up until the middle of August. We have a month of, generally speaking, very, very dry conditions, and it allows a competitive advantage of grass seed farmers who have good irrigation and great soil to be able to grow this particular crop, cut it down, field dry it. It sits in the field for 5 to 7 days, and then it gets combined and picked up. No other place in the world has that steady climate that allows for that particular, even though Most people like food rather than lawns, but no one else is able to really do this. We can actually do the same thing and use this ecological advantage paired with a technological and horticultural advantage by using these autoflowering plants to plant thousands of acres of very rare and useful compounds that are present in these plants after specific breeding. Grow them out and dry them in a way that doesn't require a huge drying infrastructure that you would have to have for other crops or in other locations. It's a huge, I think it's a huge step forward in terms of being able to make these compounds available, make them an everyday thing so that you can literally walk into any supermarket and find something that is useful in targeting a particular malady. We just need to figure out exactly what those compounds
Which is which, yeah, right on. I've got 2 follow-up questions for you, Seth. The first one is I hear from a lot of folks when I've become kind of an evangelist for autoflowers because I'm so into them. But people come up to me and they're like, we don't want autoflowers because we can't breed with them and they're not for everybody. And I want my 9-foot plants. And you already dispelled the short plants thing. I did not know they were taller. But I like that you just said that there are particular nature environments where you want the photoperiod, some that are photoperiod but finish early, and then there's the autoflowers. I've not heard that analysis before, so will you go a little more in depth in that? Why do we still need the other 2 categories?
Oh, we don't. It's nice to have diversity.
Wait a minute. Well, we do need them. I mean, we need them to breed with. Because the landrace strains are photoperiod. And so we need those. So, yeah, we need them.
Good example is this is something that a lot of us living in a black market, it was difficult to be able to get information about the way that people produce in other areas of the country or other areas of the world. Great example is Kentucky and Tennessee. So Kentucky and Tennessee have incredibly wet July, August, and Septembers, and then they have at the very end of September and then through October they have perfect weather. I mean, it's almost like what Oregon is like in late August, early September before the rains hit. So as most of us know, here, we need to make sure that our plants are out of the field, taken care of, harvested, dried, properly handled. If it's not done by the middle of September, you're really pushing yourself. You're really chancing it. In those areas, it's the opposite. You want to actually get your plants out at the end of October. So in that case, a long season, a full season photoperiod sensitive plant is really the way to go. If you have an autoflowering plant in certain areas, you can plant your autoflowers in early May, go back and replant in mid-July and end up getting 2 crops and basically double the productivity of what you have available to you.
See, unless you live in Alaska where you're allowed to have 6 plants, 3 of which are allowed to be in flower, So I always tell people, don't treat this like broccoli, where you plant it all at once. You stagger it. And I don't mean you wait for the crop to harvest. Every 2 weeks or every week you put in a couple of more seeds. And then when the regulator comes to your house, you go, no, I only got 3 in flower, Forget the fact that I got 50 pounds of drying weed over here. But they really are. Everything you say, again, sort of emphasizes the idea that, boy, this is something that a home gardener would, people grow heirloom tomatoes, Mary, next door neighbor, she's famous because she's got the Oregon summer spring, and George next door is famous because his are plum tomatoes that make the best sauce, and they give them away, and that's the same thing that's going to happen with these autoflowers. Mine, look at the colors on this one. Look at the landscape capabilities on this one. They're going to be landscape plants. They're going to be a plant that everybody accepts. We've got to get rid of that stigma, but it's happening. And this is the plant that's going to carry us over the line, I'm convinced, and help the big plants as well. So
I really like what you said too about neighbors sharing, right? Because if we all have got plant limits, we're limited by our variety. And it's just like tomatoes, right? If you grow tomatoes at home, you're still gonna end up buying tomatoes at the store. It's not like commercial tomato growers are all hosed because we're all growing at home tomatoes.
you buy the ones at the store so you get the seeds so you can grow them yourself. But okay.
There you go. But this is another great idea because neighbors can grow different varieties and trade, and it creates increased community, and everybody gets to try more wheat, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a win as well.
So last year at the Alaska State Fair, they actually, in Kenai, they had a cannabis entry thing. And I'm convinced every state fair in the country is going to have an autoflower cannabis contest. You know, I mean, it's just, this is the best thing that ever happened to our industry because it's going to get Mom and Pop and Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally, who normally would be against it, into it. And that's what we really need so we can get the taxes out of it.
Amen. Amen. I will say that they are a pain in the ass.
Why?
From a breeding perspective. So we make feminized seed. We don't use males. And if you can come to me with a good argument as to what is actually contained in the male genome that's useful and how you can access and figure out what those traits are, I'm open to having my mind changed. That's what science is about. But the way that we operate is we make feminized seed and we use females because it allows us to know what the chemotype is, to know what the terpene profiles are, to know what the potency is, the flower structure, and then be able to figure out how that's inherited from generation to generation. Autoflowering plants are a different animal in the sense that when you plant that seed, that clock is ticking. You can't just go, oh, hey, that's a great plant. Well, I'll just re-veg it and get some cuttings off of it and use it for breeding. It's done. Great example of this, last year I was working through, had about 20 different CBG-rich plants trying to figure out what the average ratio of CBG to THC was to identify which plants we could use, or at least what the frequency was for developing really, really high ratio plants. And one of the individuals from that population, we sent the results into a third-party lab after we tried to screen them in-house, and they came back and said, whoa, 50% of your total cannabinoid profile was a compound that we've never seen before. It's not a terpene, it looks like a cannabinoid from its molecular weight, but we don't have any reference standards to be able to identify what it is. And this is Pixis in Portland. They're a very good lab. They have more cannabinoids available to them than most labs in the country, and very good equipment, very well-trained personnel. And the person I was interacting with said, can you send me another sample? And I'm tearing my hair out saying, that was the only plant. That was it. It's gone. Like, it's gone. You can't get that back. And so you go back and grow hundreds of those plants out, and you never find that same plant again. So for a structured breeding program, when you're trying to isolate these individual compounds and turn them into useful field-ready or home grower-ready seeds, it poses a significant challenge because you only have a certain amount of time. We have literal professionals now working at our company who are trying to find other ways of making this happen. And it's a significant technological challenge. So there's ways around it. But it takes a ton of space, a ton of time, and a lot of motivation to really be able to isolate them. So they're a different animal when it comes to the breeding standpoint.
But that's from a professional perspective. From a real amateur perspective. If you take two auto-flowering plants and breed them together, you can breed them. And they're fun. They're just 9 weeks. Holy crow. And all of a sudden, hey, I think I'll name this after my wife. You know what I mean? Just like the big guys do. You know what I mean? But it's really kind of fun. And the idea that you can get somebody's, genetics and no, I gotta be careful. They talk about genetics in this conference here. Sorry, folks. Just
Too soon.
Side joke here. Too soon. You get somebody's great genetics, you say, gee, I wonder if as an amateur, can I fool around with this stuff a little bit? Now you're not as exact as these guys, obviously, but you can fool around with it, and you can do it all winter long, and, under 20 hours of light, you can do it all night long. It's just, this is a fun plant to grow. Yeah, it can be difficult, and it can cause some problems, and if you're a professional grower, you got to adjust yourself a little bit, but boy, if you are a professional grower and you're growing medical cannabis, get into these autoflowers, see what you think, see if we can improve the ability to get more medicine out there.
And
I think it's a really important point too. You brought up the historical reference back to the lowrider varieties from 2003. That was a shitty plant.
Oh, but the
It
worst.
was the worst. I grew some of that, and it just made me sick to smoke. It's horrible. The terpene profile was terrible. The structure was not great, but you could see the promise. You could see the promise, and what it took was small-time breeders who were working under either medical programs or in their garage surreptitiously to improve those plants. And it wasn't until 2010 that I finally consumed something that changed my mind about autoflowering plants. Someone had taken one of DJ Short's blueberry varieties, myrcene dominant with a number of different minor terpene different minor terpenes that end up making it a very calm, anti-anxiety experience. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of work. But they finally instilled that into an auto-flowering plant that made the effect and the flavor just as good or better than a lot of the other commercially available varieties at the time. And that was the...
No, you're right. The early ones, they're interesting, but they weren't any good. And that's why, I remember there's a listserv called autoflowering.net, which we kid about. They threw me off because I got on it and I said, gee, I'm writing this book. I need some pictures. And they threw me off, So I finally, thanks to Shango, got back on again, and Ted hasn't. When they first started, and you would be on Grass City or one of those other forums, and you say, oh, I'm growing autoflowers, people laughed at you. They made fun of you. You were stigmatized, and basically you were drummed out of the community. So somebody started the AutoNet, and if you go back the way, people were just sort of struggling, and around 2008, 9, somewhere right in that area, they hit the sweet spot. And then they started laughing at other people. And the pictures, oh my God. And on Instagram, just yesterday, I saw one, somebody had one of these movies where it went from seed to harvest, in 2 seconds. Holy crow, fabulous. I'm telling you folks, get some seeds. You are going to love these.
And I love to buy feminized seeds for my own home growing and to help patients, right? Because being able to take males out of the mix, if you're not breeding them, this is a win. But right now there are still lots of autoflower seeds that are being sold regs, right? So you're gonna get boys and girls. And so, if you really, if you just want the flowers and you don't want to play with the plant, as Jeff is suggesting, get yourself some fantastic modern, feminized seeds from Mephisto Genetics or somebody who's got a good reputation, and it's all very plug and play, just like Jeff is describing. But if you want to enjoy that extra horticulture experience of making something that did not exist in the world until you did it, find yourself a pack of autoflower reg seeds and pop a couple of them that you think sound interesting. And it's really easy to collect male pollen. You take a branch and put it in a bag and you shake it a little bit. Now you got a bag of pollen and you walk to the other side or maybe your friend's house and you've got a paintbrush and you put some of that pollen on there and you paint it onto one branch of the plant, and then when you're done, next year you're gonna have 40 or 50 seeds. And like you said, you get to name it, which can be the most fun part.
But you don't have to wait till next year. That's the other thing. I mean, these things grow indoors really well. In Anchorage, we're really excited about the opportunity to grow these things because we get a photo period the same time we get the frosting. Man, this is going to just change our whole world. It's going to be fabulous.
Right on. So, autoflowers, as you just heard from talking about the lowrider old chemovar, a lot of people nowadays still consider them cute, right? But professionals are like, man, this is just something on the side that isn't gonna, matter to the rest of us. But then, you meet Seth and you walk acre upon acre of these beautiful plants in September, and the air is filled with terpenes, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I want to lay out my tent and just live here, right? And so what I'd like to hear from you both are, commercial applications, right? And specifically, let's talk about yield and quality, because it's one thing that it's all incredibly easy and we can grow them in tents, but a lot of people are thinking about, scale for commercial, and also, am I gonna get enough flower for my effort for home growth? So I'd like you both to kind of speak to that option.
Well, here in Oregon, I mean, I would start with New Breed Seeds, frankly. They're from Oregon. They were the first ones to get their license to be able to sell seeds, and they are growing for commercial growers. I think the last time I spoke to them, they said, they're selling the seeds at the dispensary. It's just a pain in the ass. So they want to go home, and there are lots of commercial growers that are using these things for a couple of reasons, all the ones we've already discussed. If you're growing indoors on racks, if you get the right size plant, double racks, triple racks, you can use the whole ceiling all the way up to the ceiling. The space on these things make it so that you can interspace them in between existing plants, which is really a useful thing to do. You've already got the heat, you've already got the light if you're indoors, And to be able to interspace a little small plant that's not going to detract from the bigger plants that you're trying to grow, it doubles your ability to get more income as a result of doing this stuff. So in that regard, it's important. And then, of course, the idea that you can get something in 7, 9, if you want to go longer, 12 weeks, wow. I mean, from a commercial perspective, if the yield is good and the power is good, if that's the terpene spectrum, you're there. Why would you want to grow anything but? So I really highly encourage you to try these. They're really quite something. And to contact, people like New Breeze Seeds and get names of other commercial breeders that are doing it. Go see what they're doing. We all share information. That's what we do. So.
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me of that too. Before you answer, I want to plug with the correct URL, autoflower.net.
Yeah.
And because this is Jeff's story was spot on, right? These were the people who were laughed off of other forums for using autoflowers, and so they decided to create their own where they could be misfit toys together. And so, one of the things that we've lost in our scene, I think, as people have gotten more money focused, is everybody's got IP now, and everybody wants to hide and protect things. And, back in the day, outside of just like not wanting to go to jail, people were really open to sharing within the community, sharing best practices, swapping seeds, all this kind of stuff, which you're seeing less on the commercial side, but you're still seeing on this group at autoflower.net, because they are all trying to learn from each other. They are sharing best practices because they haven't mattered for a while. And it really excites me to see some of the leaders in that particular community knowing what things are going to be like in 3 or 4 years when autoflowers just falls off people's lips so easily. And these people will be the new generation of superstars. And that, that's cool when people who, I love an underdog story, right? So
They have some of the best bud porn I have ever seen.
Yeah, the photos are just incredible. So Seth, going back to you, specifically, the people that you are sowing seed to are growing at acreage size, right? And when people are, you don't have to give people pitches about your seeds anymore, but just for the sake of this conversation, what does that pitch sound like when they're all like, really? You want me to, plant a whole field of these, what are essentially still probably going to be smaller plants?
Wait a minute, what's the name of the company again?
Which one?
Yours.
Oh, we don't advertise. I owe you like 5 emails, so we can't handle the advertising right now. Honestly, we don't pitch it to people. People come to us and say, hey, I really want to try this. I really want to try this. And we say, no, you don't. It's really hard. You're going to fuck up. You're not going to do it right. It took us 3 years to figure out how to get the plants in the field without having flowering in trays and actually getting a good yield. This year we're moving on to large-scale field trials for different density of planting, and we've stepped back and we're actually putting it into the hands of much more competent farmers who've been farming other crops for their entire lives.
And how many cultivars?
Oh, that's such a technical question.
Roughly. How many different kinds of plants, roughly?
1.
Okay.
Not really.
Yeah.
There's a number of different varieties that are out there, and it all comes down. For us, it's not about cultivars. Ours are chemotypes.
Oh,
We look at plants as having very particular chemical compounds that are replicable generation after
I
generation.
should correct it.
It's okay, don't worry. But it comes down to trying to figure out how you, in the same way that you're describing maximizing space in the small area inside, this is how do you maximize the productivity on a per acre basis over thousands of acres. And it really comes down to what we've seen with successful farmers is either direct seeding, which is wrought with all kinds of problems that most of you probably don't care about, but it all comes down to the depth of the planting of the seed. You're talking about literally millimeters will make or break success. And then the other side of it is the density of planting for both weed suppression and to maximize minimize lateral branching and force the plants to basically just turn into one solid flower. That's really what we're looking at this year. And then I would say for 2020, yeah, definitely, we'll be ready for you to buy auto-flowering seeds, both type 3 CBD-rich plants and type 4 pure CBG lines.
So what are the other advantages? I mean, clearly the short cycle is great for scaled agriculture, but when I visited your farm, you were mentioning some other things like the fact that the plants are uniform, so they're really easy to repeat cut on a sled. So what are the traditional farming advantages of this plant versus the photoperiod ones?
The main one, and again, it's going to depend on your location. In certain areas, you can't cut the plant down and let it dry in the field. And a lot of people have had questions about that. Our team did some amazing experiments this last summer. Long hours in the field, very hot conditions, harvesting about 15 acres, I believe it was about 38,000 plants in early August. Cutting them down, laying them down in the field to basically cook at 100 degrees during the day, and then grind them up and put them into totes just to see how much CBD would be lost and what the terpene loss was going to be. And what we found was you're going to lose about 2/3 of your terpenes. They're very volatile. They vaporize. They're gone. But there's still enough to be able to get some efficacy from entourage effect, depending on the type of terpenes that you're working with and their volatility. The heavier sesquiterpenes tend to stick around. The really volatile monoterpenes are always going to be gone. But the moral of the story on that was that CBD content did not change. There was no statistical difference between plants that were cut down and dried in the field versus plants that were cut down and hung up in a warehouse. So again, that's a great thing if you happen to have a very dry late July, early August. But if you have a rainy period, that may not necessarily be the plant that you want to use. So it's really about, like any farming or any cannabis production, it's about being able to use the plasticity of the plant to adapt to your own local ecosystem and climate.
Right on. So Seth, I'm going to give you a particular question here. It's just a sniglet off topic, but it's very important for where we are today. And what I want to ask you is, you have particular experience in the dangers of pollen contamination, right? And since both feminized and regular auto seeds exist, I think this would be a good moment for you to make your pitch for not running males outdoors. I'd love you to share the story about your valley, just to make everybody more aware of the dangers of pollen.
If you have a pollinated crop and you're growing outside, you're going to lose 30% of your total cannabinoids and 50% of your biomass. The seed is a tremendous energy sapping creation that ends up taking the power away from your plants and reducing the not only the profitability, but the actual amount of cannabinoids that you can harvest outdoors. I know Oregon, at this point, we're trying to launch a nonprofit organization that will help in the future in terms of creating buffer zones between farms so that we don't have issues of pollen contamination. It's the Oregon Cannabis Pinning Association, ocpa.org. It's the only thing I'll advertise today, hopefully. And we're really just kind of we're trying to raise awareness this year and then actually move into a more formal pinning system for 2020. But pollen outdoors is a huge issue, and there are a number of people who are either growing regular male-female seeds or trying to create seed outdoors just because you can produce so much. It's a tremendously productive way to make seed, but we've had to basically go to a lot of small-time breeders who are saying, oh man, this is the big rush. I want to make sure that I can make a bunch of seed this year and then sell it for next year, not knowing that in doing so, not only are they not going to get a successful crop because there's other people who are doing that, and now you have a contaminated crop yourself with no purity that you won't be able to sell if you're a moral or ethical person, but you're also going to destroy all of your surrounding neighbors' ability to actually grow a crop and have something that's valuable at the end of the year. So it really comes down to, it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but it is definitely, in terms of being able to create an environment that we all can continue to produce cannabis in, and an environment that our kids can potentially continue to produce cannabis in. Oregon is one of those really, really lucky spots. We're in a sweet spot. We can grow good stuff. We have great breeders. We have good water. We have good land. But we really need to make sure that we can protect that. And pollen travels a long ways. It's dangerous.
And I think that, these pollen exclusion zones, which I've been calling them, do you have an actual official name for them?
That sounds good.
Yeah, pollen exclusion zone, yeah. So that's what I've been calling it to people. And the first time that Seth posted about this on their Instagram, It was ugly. You know, the thread was mostly people saying, you will not tell me what to do with my property, comma, damn it, And
Monsanto, you want to control the seeds.
yeah, exactly. And and I get where people are coming from because I don't like to be told what to do either. But what it is, it's an economic and horticultural opportunity for right where almost all of us live here. And so what we're seeing is that just like Napa Valley, right? They are growing world-class wine, but there are certain things that the community has all agreed to do and not do so that they don't screw up the wineries and their ability to grow grapes, because it brings so much economic power to the region. And for me, that's what I see for these beautiful valleys throughout Oregon, where they can, they've already got hemp farmers. It is a burgeoning industry that is light years ahead of many of the rest of the parts of the world that are going to try to follow up. And when you have a lead, even though I don't want anybody to tell me what to do with my property either, I really hope that those people would keep open minds, because the reasons for not growing, pollinating cannabis plants outdoors make a lot of sense for the Oregon community. And I think that is lost on a lot of people because they haven't let their ears be open to the argument yet.
I think people think it's about control. And the problem with this is that it's not about trying to prevent people from making seed. I encourage people to go do it. Like I've said before, it's emancipatory, not only to grow it, but to breed it and then see the outcome. It's a beautiful thing, and it's part of what makes us human. We all could probably agree that people have a right to fire, right? You can have a fire on your property. That's cool until it jumps your fence and burns down your neighbor's house. At that point, that's your liability, it's not your fire. And that's really what we're looking at. Everyone in Oregon has a right to farm, but you don't have a right to exclude other people from being able to engage in meaningful economic activity that not only is helping themselves, but helping other people.
Isn't the general motto, your fun ends when the other guy's displeasure begins? So you do not have a right to plant seeds outside, I would say. You don't have a right to do it, period. If it's going to impact your neighbor, you don't have that right.
And also for folks who are thinking about doing, 3-4 plants in your backyard and you're going to bring in a male, that's way different than we're talking about, growing acres of regular seeds,
Unless
right?
you're next door to them.
Yeah, unless
No, it's fine. We've had to take, because of that, and we don't want to stop anybody from having that right, but to be able to protect our interests, we had to make sure that our greenhouses are sealed. We only make seed in places that we're comfortable making it, and then once it comes out, we still have to test it just to make sure that it is what we think it is.
And to let you know that Seth practices what he preaches, it is really crazy to go into their breeding warehouses or greenhouses, because they suck you in, right? So that none of the pollen escapes. When you open it, they've got all the air being pulled into a filter, so that you open the door and you're like, and then you're sucked in, so that all the pollen is kept inside. And that's cool, right?
He had straight hair before he went in there.
So, all right. So the last thing I want to hit, because we're wrapping up here, is I want to go back, leave a little bit of the breeding analytics stuff and talk specifically about the smoke, right? Because most everybody in here probably enjoys the taste and the experience of cannabis, and I've smoked the stuff that you grow for extraction, right? And some of the stuff that you grow for extraction, these like let's tear up these flowers, right? And I take them home and smoke, and I'm like, God damn, this is really good flower, right? And so let's hit on just real quickly the fact that it may be convenient, it may be great for the valley, it may be good for patients, it may be extractable, but it's good smoke too. Let's start with you, Jeff, because I know that you love autoflower.net and seeing those. So give your plug for Autoflower Taste.
Yeah, so I'm a vaporizer. I vaporize flower. I haven't combusted in maybe 3 years. There's a wonderful website, incidentally, called FC Combustion, and you can guess what the FC stands for, but these auto flowers, they taste just like regular cannabis. It's delicious stuff. And the numbers on it, if you're into numbers, I think it's a fool's game. You know, if you can't get stoned because your number is only 6% THC, then take another hit, for God's sakes. You know, the idea that you got to buy a 30 to get stoned is just, you know. Anyway, they taste delicious. They have this. The oils are phenomenal. And you know, when I do it with other people, a lot of times my friends up in Anchorage, they go, man, these things grow so fast, they don't have time to rot. You know, I said, what are you talking about? He says, there's nothing bad tasting. You know, it's obviously the guy was very stoned. They are just like regular cannabis. They didn't used to be, but they are now. And I would defy you to tell the difference between vaporizing an autoflower and vaporizing a regular photo period. There is no difference whatsoever.
I would agree with that, and it's 65 to 70% of them are myrcene dominant. So what we're seeing, it was fun to walk through and take a look at the flowers that were entered for the competition this year, and see the different terpene profiles and watch the evolution of what growers and breeders are targeting at this point. Go through and count how many are myrcene dominant this year compared to years past versus terpinolene dominant plants. It's a big thing. It's your fuel flavor, your diesel flavor, terpinolene, beta-caryophyllene, alpha-pinene. We're seeing that now emerge in autoflowering plants as well. And it's a little bit more difficult with autoflowering plants just because of the breeding that we were talking about earlier. But they definitely pack all of the flavor. And to be perfectly honest, the potency as well. Out of our type 4 high CBG varieties that we've developed, the individual plant that has far and away had the highest overall CBG percentage was an autoflowering plant. And it came in at almost 16% CBG. It was over 17% CBGA before decarbing. So it's definitely possible to create absolutely terpene-rich, cannabinoid-heavy, and diverse chemotypes with these day-neutral plants.
And I know that you're heavy in the analytics and you test everything in-house. Do their numbers come out comparable to photosensitive plants as well?
On average, they tend to be a little bit lower, but it also depends on the way that you treat them and the light spectrum.
Don't they also have a little bit more CBD?
You can change any of those.
Well, yeah. But I mean, from an amateur grower, it seems to me that there's always CBD in my autoflowers, but I'm not sure there is in my bigger plants. I don't know. But
yeah, we haven't seen that. CBC, there is a little bit more CBC. There, at least there tends to be, and that actually, it depends on the varieties that you're looking at, but it is definitely present in autoflowering plants.
Let's dispel another rumor about taste. I know that you spend a lot of time breeding them, and a lot of people say, okay, so this is a cookies autoflower. So essentially that means that's cookies crossed with a ruderalis plant, and a lot of people say the rudy plants taste like crap, right? So what do you have to say about people saying that there's all this like this ruderalis terpenes coming along for the ride?
There used to be. I think that used to be a valid distinction. One of the main things to consider as well is normally what you're trying to do in a breeding program is look at the F2. So you take two parents that are very divergent, cross them, and then do either an open pollination or a targeted selfing in the F1 generation. And then you have F2 plants that exhibit every possible combination or permutation that you can possibly imagine. It's where the most diversity is expressed. If you're a plant breeder, that's where you should be looking for amazing things. If you have a specific terpene profile that you're trying to target, you can't overlook that F1 cross, because that's actually where you would identify the plants that have the most similar profiles to whatever it is that you're trying to target. So yeah, you can very, I won't say very easily, but you could take a GG4 and cross it to an autoflowering plant, and then do your initial selection in that F1, inbreed it one more time, and you can lock those terpene profiles in. It obviously takes more time for stabilization of traits and that sort of thing, but terpenes and making them taste good, we can do that.
Absolutely. So we're running out of time here. So I'm sure that you want to hear more from both of these folks. So for Jeff Lowenfels, you can find his, at least one episode with him on the Shaping Fire podcast if you go to shapingfire.com. I also have several of Jeff's presentations at various conferences on my YouTube channel at /Shango Los. Seth has been on my show to talk about both the new age CBD autoflowers that are out there, and then again with a really insightful interview on the nexus of CBD and hemp in the new economics of CBD from hemp. And then, of course, don't forget about Jeff's book coming out in October.
You can order it on Amazon today.
You can already pre-order it on Amazon now. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It's been very informative. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Really interesting stuff. The truth of the matter is probably autoflowers are the future. It makes you kind of sad.
Thank you, Shango. Thank you, panelists.
Is that crazy?
Hi, friends. How are we doing? Just want to make a little announcement. Please be sure to stop by the Green Light Law Group Relaxation Lounge. I know that when I think about lawyer stuff, I think about, wow, I really need to relax right now.
All right. Should we?
Yes, and today you can do that.
Should we go download this?
The Green Light Law Group Relaxation Lounge is on the west side of the vendor hall.
We can take it with
And
us.
then download
Think
it.
about the law,
My
what
stream just
laws
dropped because
are
of poor
breaking
connection
and
with my
not
ears.
breaking,
No, I'm
while
still
getting
good.
a hand massage,
So should we leave it live and walk
or a
outside?
motel, or
Here we go.
a bacon,
Here, I'll let you take it, 'cause I'm gonna grab my bag.
therapy experience.
It's all yours.
And enjoy some
Can I
life.
flip the camera or something?
Also, if you haven't
Flip it
yet
around?
cruised through the hallway of data posters, don't miss your chance to view the chemistry and effect of each entry up close. So along this wall out here, it is very cool, very interesting.
We should go do that too.
And the posters were sustainably printed on hemp paper by Hemp Press. And in case you don't know, this is the lovely Steph Barnhart. She is the woman we are perhaps most indebted to for the wonderful experience we are all having this weekend.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm not going to spend much time. It's not my usual role to come onto the stage when I'm producing an event. I really appreciate you all being here. I just wanted to take a second to address something and acknowledge a very important situation in our community. As many of you are aware, on April 16th, Phylos Bioscience announced the plans to launch an in-house breeding program. In the wake of this announcement, there's been a tremendous amount of upheaval in the community. We know that recovering and moving forward from this event and all of the questions that it has raised will take a tremendous amount of time and difficult conversations, which are actually our favorite type of conversation to have. We're deeply interested in being a part of this conversation with you and finding the right path forward to support this community in whatever way it needs. If you have questions, you want to express concerns, and most importantly, if you have suggestions or requests for things that would be helpful, Cultivation Classic and all of the organizing people who've had a role in making this event and community what it is, really want to be sure that we take advantage of this opportunity of all of us in the same space together, offline, to communicate. We also know that sometimes approaching someone in a hallway is not for everyone, which is why we've added to our main registration space downstairs a community comments box, which we invite you to drop an index card into at any point throughout the day to provide anonymous feedback, ideas, or anything else that you want to share, even just a moment of catharsis. We felt it was extremely crucial to acknowledge what this community has been through and the conversation that we're all having about how to move forward together. So we appreciate you being here. Find us in the hallway, use the comment box, and enjoy the next panel, which we are very thrilled to present. I'll toss it back to Amanda for the introduction.
Thank you, and thank you, Steph. I think that you've done such a good job of really listening and, trying to get input from the community up here, and it's really a nice thing to watch. So next up, we have a conversation moderated by one of Cultivation Classic's co-founder, the wonderful Jeremy Plum, who's going to bring these panelists out. So please welcome Production Science, The Road Ahead.
Hey, good buddy. Broadcasting for Terry here.
How's it going?
Good day, buddy.
Hold on. I think that's film it.
We don't have to record this. We just go out. He's recording this one, so.
Want to go ahead? Want to go for a puff?
Yeah, but are you live right now?
Yeah.
You get that last bit?
Yep.
That's awesome. I filmed it too.
Bear with us, everybody. That's an awesome suit. Look at that. Holy shit, you guys gotta see this. Gotta zoom back out. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Introduce yourself, my friend, Pharmex.
Oh, hi, I'm Eric, CEO of Pharmex, last
caught him.
electric processor.
I caught him by surprise.
You caught me by surprise.
We'll do it again.
Okay, head outside and go have a smoke and then come back?
Go for it.
Okay.
There you go. She was just here. I don't want to leave her behind
You can meet us outside,
Probably
buddy.
can't take this outside, huh?
Yeah, they're gonna yell at you again.
Yeah.
for having an empty cup.
For having
Yeah,
an
I
empty
probably
cup.
can't even have an empty cup outside.
Where the hell does it go?
Or water or nothing. Hey, let's just turn this off and then get it downloaded,
Right
and then we'll do another one. Hey guys, so let's go over here.
We'll be back,
Let's
guys.
go down the hall. Let's go over here and have a talk. Okay, so let's. I have no idea what's going on, guys. We're just like kind of flying by the seat of our pants, but I wanted to get out and show you guys like the hallway and take some more film. And there's like lots of people to talk to and take questions.
There's a couple of the
So-
panels later that are really interesting.
Yeah, there's some really good stuff coming up. So stay tuned. I'm going to go ahead and download this one so we can make sure that it doesn't get erased. And then we will be back. Okay, guys? Hey, share with everybody, please. Like, subscribe. We love you. Peace.